Hey Vic,
Hello, brother.
what's going on?
So much is going on.
What are we talking about today?
Uh, well, I guess we can talk about automation.
Automation.
Yeah.
What about automation?
Well, it all starts with a phone call to my grandma, just like every podcast starts out with. Anyways, was talking to my grandma, and long story short, I had to break to her that yes, I was getting high, and it was a shocker for her at first.
That has nothing to do with automation.
Yes, but anyways, it led to a follow-up phone call about. She's like, okay, fine, I'll listen to this podcast. We'll go ahead, we'll do this once. And so she listened to the first one and then called me back and she says, y'all ever seen that movie Cheech and Chong? Because that's what y'all sound like. And I'm like, so did you like it or no? And she basically says what we talk about is thousands of years into the future. She's claiming at most 5,000 years. Like the year's 5,000.
She has a very skewed perception of when automation could possibly hit.
Yes, yeah. She's like full integration and all that other stuff. That's like 5,000 years from, or 3,000 years from now.
So we made it sound like, oh man, we're so freaking high. We're speaking interdimensional. Like this is some crazy far out stuff.
Yeah. And then we got to talking, and basically it came to, well, Grandma, what do you know about automation? She's like, I know it's not going to happen anytime soon, you know. And it's like, well, let me break it to you the easy way.
Y'all started getting into it.
Yes, and we started getting into it. And then as we talked more and more, she's like, she went from it happening in the year 5,000 to, man, that might happen in 15, 20 years. And I'm like, yep, that's exactly what we've been saying.
So that's kind of what we're going to expand on here is for a lot of people who are thinking that automation may be light years or even maybe not so
100
far.
years, a lifetime.
Maybe not in your lifetime. We're going to kind of maybe expand a little on automation that we have now. Maybe you're not seeing it so prevalent, and where it's heading, and how soon that may be coming.
Yeah. So do you want to start with the first industrial revolution and the difference between that?
Let's talk about a little bit of where we've been leading up to this point, how we kind of got here. So the first
industrial revolution was in Britain, and basically it expanded on the idea of making textiles. So these were kind of like the first factories and stuff like that. And when people think of the first industrial revolution, they think of the famous one. You know, kids working in factories and all this other stuff, and there's no child labor laws, and it's poor living conditions and everything. And that's the first industrial revolution. Okay, and that's like in the 18th century. Let's assume 1750. Let's just call it 1750.
Okay.
And then we get to the second industrial revolution. Now that one was here in America. That one was pretty much done by Henry Ford. That one was basically him pretty much being able to mass produce vehicles.
And around what years?
That one would be in, well, they say it started in 1890, but really people know Henry Ford from like the 1910s, 1915s.
So maybe he may have been working on it about 20 years prior to it really hitting. But so maybe about 1890 is when this stuff, started becoming.
And so the difference is about 150 years.
Right.
About 150 years difference. Well, now we are currently living through the,
or let's even say let's be a little bit generous and say about 100 years.
100 years.
Yeah, maybe about 100 years, maybe a little bit more, but somewhere around there. And so that was from the first.
That's from the first to the second.
To the second revolution.
Yes.
Okay, and so in the second revolution, Henry Ford was able to get these assembly lines going?
Yeah, that's what they were.
And with that, what direction were we heading in?
We're basically heading to this direction of we need more labor. We need a lot more labor. So there was more people working on these vehicles. So the vehicle would roll down. Someone would put on the tires, another person would put on the doors, another person would do the stitching and the leather and all this other craziness. and it was just a bunch of people working, and they were just a bunch of laborers. And then it went to and then obviously the Roaring '20s when everything was good and dandy and all that, and then you had buildings like skyscrapers starting to come up and stuff like that.
So his assembly line led to a lot more jobs and a lot of people being able to kind of move around.
Yeah.
In automobiles, they were able to kind of venture out further. They weren't in just walking distance. You were able to expand.
It was basically reach. People who had money lived in the suburbs, and then those people were able to commute to work. Right. And so they could live out, out in the, I wouldn't say country, it would be the suburbs.
So you would even say that like stuff like infrastructure was being developed.
Like they had to make roads and stuff like that.
So since more cars are being out on roadways, more roadways have to be built, just like, you see to this day, where we're still expanding roads because more cars are getting put on it.
And I'm not saying they, first Model T was built and then a bunch of roads sprung up. It's a process.
But exactly. And a lot of these were maybe dirt roads that began, but it was kind of mapping out. We were mapping out. We were venturing out into areas that were just kind of uncharted, I guess, and developing areas, building up buildings, and all this kind of stuff. It's just to get an idea of what was happening, to get a little recap. And where we came from and where we're heading.
And then I think World War I or World War II hit, one of those, and then we mass produced Jeeps. Jeeps became the go-to for the military, so that's even more vehicles. So not only did the military go ahead and use these vehicles, but when the soldiers went ahead and came back, they all said, hey, well, I want a car now. Because I was already driving one, or they're all over in the military, this and that and the other. Now I want one for myself.
Yeah.
And so it became even more apparent that vehicles were, getting produced and the demand was there for them.
Yeah.
And then we led to basically the third revolution, Industrial Revolution, and that one being, we're currently living through it. It's the idea of these smartphones, the 3D printing, and the dexterity of these robots, how advanced they're getting. And you could argue that,
I guess we're this where were we? So from the first revolution is about 100 years, and then from the second revolution, you're saying it was around 1890 to now where we're at.
Well, you could say it started. People speculate about 1890s when it started. I would say about 1920.
1920, somewhere around there.
That's when it really got pushed through.
When it really started. So it took up maybe 30 years or so to really get going. Mm-hmm. And then it finally got into effect, and all this stuff started.
It started
rising, rising out of it, and then we hit. So that would be about 1920, and then we hit. What would you say this third revolution?
Man, I say it started in the 90s when internet became a thing. Internet
do you think maybe even things. Would you even include
early 2000s?
Maybe. Electronics in general? Would you say maybe electronics? Because that would maybe go a little bit further towards like around the 70s when like cars were starting to get electronic components put into them. I mean that's in one sense. Cars were doing that. Like for instance, some of the more luxurious cars were getting some of the electronic devices put into them, and then some of your devices at home, you were seeing a little bit more electronics.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And you can argue that it's the idea of transistors is what you're saying, is that kind of revolutionized the modern world, and it did. Right. And that was made, in the I want to say around in the 60s, and really didn't get implemented until like the 70s, but not in vehicles.
Yeah.
I guess an example of a luxury vehicle, I have a 72 Cadillac Eldorado, and it has automatic headlights.
Right.
And so it can detect when it's dark outside and then turn on the headlights. Yeah. Like that's some phenomenal technology.
For that time.
Yeah, it wasn't up until recently that we said, we're going to have automatic headlights in all vehicles.
Right.
But the idea is that you could say it started in the 70s, but really didn't take off until the 90s when the idea of computers came around.
and that's what I'm getting at. I'm just trying to get a little bit of like timeline. So from 1920 to 1970, let's say that's 50 years. That's half the time it took to get from the first revolution to the second revolution. So now we're on this third revolution that you're saying that we're living in right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people even realize that. I mean, I think that's kind of where your grandmother was, kind of uncertain of where things are headed, because it's kind of, you don't even really consider the third revolution maybe popping off that early as in, the 70s, but it's been happening. So from the 70s to the 90s, which you would consider when this really started to evolve, when computers and the internet and all that kind of stuff started taking off and leading up to the smartphone, that would have put us about another 20 years forward from 1970 to 1990. So you can kind of see the progression of how this is starting to accelerate.
Yeah.
And so from the 1990s to where we're at now, that would be right at about 30 years, right under 30 years. Where you would say we're on the brink of
the fourth. Yeah, and that's what everyone's talking about. The fourth revolution is basically saying that...
The fourth industrial revolution.
The fourth industrial revolution is basically saying that if we don't do anything now, these robots are going to go ahead, or I should say robots and AI are going to go ahead and take over these kind of mundane jobs. Well, the first are going to start with taking over these mundane jobs. Retail work, accounting work, some of the banking industry, and then you could even argue that they're going to go ahead and improve these medical industry as well. They're going to be used in medical industry.
Right. You could say that they're almost going to end up being implemented in all facets of life, wherever it can be, implemented. And if it makes sense to put them in, then they're going to be, part of our life.
Yeah, they're just going to replace people.
Yeah, so let's get a little bit into this third revolution to kind of, expand a little bit on
fourth or third?
The third. Let's go into the third a little bit, leading up into this fourth. So this third revolution, you'd say in the 90s, we went ahead and saw the internet. So the internet was the first big thing that was coming after vehicles, where, a vehicle would be able to connect one person from, one side of the of where you're at to a whole nother side. If it was just your city, your state, or all the way to the edge of your nation, where where you hit C or whatever, but you're able to expand. And with the internet, you became able to do that in a sense without even leaving.
Yeah.
So that's what the internet was doing in connecting us. And then that kind of led up to, would you say, like smartphones?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't at first. People didn't really think about it. But you can argue that one of the first smartphones out there would be and I know we always talk about Apple, but they're kind of like one of the world standards that's been... They started up in the recent, 20 years. They started up in 20 years, and now they're just like, they're not a world standard, but they're recognized internationally by everyone.
They were able to encompass a lot of the functionality of what the internet did in connecting people.
Well, not at first. At first, it was really...
Well, of course, but that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
And you would say that ultimately they're setting a standard, and other people are kind of taken from that and, making their own product. But essentially, you're not veering far away from...
Like the biggest thing when they were coming out was BlackBerry. But again, BlackBerry had its faults, didn't really encompass the internet too much. And that just kind of led to their downfall, that and the idea of that their developers were only limited to the tools they had disposed to them by BlackBerry versus Apple that said, hey, you can use whatever you want so long as it works with this program. Go at it.
Right. So again, they were creating a device that was eventually going to be able to connect us as much as it has connected us.
Yeah.
And when do you know about when that first iPhone came out?
2002, 2003, something like that.
2002, 2003. Okay, so then that would have been about 10 years. Yeah, not even that far from when the internet really became.
I would say the internet became popular. A thing in the mid '90s.
Yeah, but it wasn't even till about 2000. Honestly, the internet didn't really even get into everybody's house, and that's another thing that you could kind of use it as an example, is that not even everybody was able to get the internet into their home before a new product was introduced into the market that was allowing you to reach these to reach everything you could within the internet through a smartphone. And again, you get to this where it was like the smartphone was the access point for most everybody.
Yeah.
To go ahead and start to reach the internet.
Yeah.
And to connect with a bunch of people. So that was about that happened pretty quick. And so with that, I guess we get to a lot of, I guess, what we're kind of wanting from this device at this point, and how it's driving us to automation. For instance, if you want tickets to a show, you can go ahead and go to certain websites to get tickets to a show.
Yeah.
And so they create different platforms to make this happen, where now you have, instead of scalpers on the street, you have people buying and selling tickets on the internet. Then you kind of go into getting a ride to a venue. Well, then you have to go ahead and incorporate Uber, a platform,
whatever.
A platform like a a ride share platform, and you've seen how quick these companies rise up.
Like one of the latest ones is like the food delivery apps.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a crazy one in itself. The fact that you don't even need to leave your house anymore to go eat.
Right. Yeah, that you can just get your food delivered.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of an extension from like Uber and Lyft to where at first they were just bringing you home. Now they'll bring your food to your house. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of speed up to companies that are doing that type of delivery service with just robots.
Mm.
And that's basically where we get to when we hit this point of automation. Of they're already out there.
Yeah, and it seems kind of far and like it doesn't really exist. But when you look at each industrial revolution, the first one made textiles. Well, in the second industrial revolution, everyone pretty much had these like synthetic clothes, or they were more accessible. And in the second one, they started off with like kind of making cars and bigger buildings and infrastructure. In the third one, we have a bunch of highways. Everyone pretty much owns at least 1 to 2 cars. And then what else was the other one? And then everything's pretty much modern, And in this revolution, Wi-Fi, 3D printing, and the idea of having a robot service you is kind of what we're doing. And I'm assuming in the fourth revolution, everywhere is going to be connected. Not everyone, but everywhere you go is pretty much going to be connected. You're going to have a lot more access to these robots in terms of what you want them to do. And then just as we saw printing back in the early 80s and all that, everyone's going to have access to 3D printing.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. So, for instance, in the first revolution, when all these factories are popping up, only big people with big money were the first ones in. But by the second revolution, when cars are being made, you start having a lot more people that are able to open up factories. And that's why you need cars and infrastructure and you could even say housing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then once you get to the third revolution, pretty much everybody already has a car and housing, a workplace and all that kind of stuff. And now you start living through the third generation. So by the fourth generation, when we start seeing a lot of this automation, I guess it would lead up to whatever would be like the fifth.
The fifth revolution would be basically full integration at that point.
Yeah, full
integration, something really close to it.
But at that point, we would have way more robotics implemented into our everyday life.
Oh, yeah. So instead of having a Roomba, your Roomba also got your groceries for you.
That's what I was going to say. Like, for instance, right now, we actually have a little robot vacuum.
His name's Alan.
And we don't really utilize him that much. But by the next revolution happening, this robot would be, doing a lot more. Like you're just saying, he would be
sweeping, and then he would also possibly even be mopping and maybe even disposing of the trash himself.
Yeah, other tasks that he could do, and then possibly you'd be using another robot to get your food delivered to you or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And or where we get to, you got to kind of include a lot of this delivery stuff because it's a lot about logistics. And when you talk about logistics,
the robot's the best thing to do it.
The robot is
because it doesn't make mistakes.
It's about efficiency and doing it to the best of its ability in the shortest amount of time.
Yeah, any mundane job, any job that has to do with numbers, any analytical work. Those were all jobs that we needed robots to do, but we didn't have the access to use them or the availability to use them. And we just filled those spots with people. Now that the jobs are going, or now that robots are going to be more easily obtained, mm-hmm. we're just going to replace the people. I was reading an article in Forbes, and it was basically saying that we made these, I don't want to call them fake jobs, but we made these jobs that are not made for us mm-hmm. to go ahead and kind of help us to where we are right now. Yeah. Like secretary work, anyone that does logistics, anyone that does mundane stuff like retail or fast food or anything like that.
Yeah.
That these were jobs that we were not supposed to have, but yet we made them.
Yeah.
And my counter argument to that is that you could argue that farming is something we need, but yet farming is getting automated as well. Mm-hmm. So it seems like everything in terms of anything can be automated.
I think there's another way to look at it. That's deep. That is really deep about how we created a self-sustaining system that was just flawed. It really isn't in our favor. We're basically
making jobs that we weren't supposed to have.
Right, like we're working ourselves to death in a sense. Like you need work, okay, here's work, and you're only going to get paid by the hour, so you have work for as long as you need, right? And I think some people with a perspective like Andrew Yang sees it a little differently, where you see the robot and you see that they're very efficient, and so you say, then you got to get the robot to do the job, right? Because mm-hmm. it's just the only thing that makes sense. Why would you charge more for a service to have a human do the work when you could get it done for less by implementing robotics and artificial intelligence? So with that, you implement this technology, and you get into a way deeper conversation of when the people that are making this money ultimately have to use that money to fund humanity. So instead of us having to work, the robots work for us.
Yeah.
If we could make that happen.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very tricky scenario there, because it's like, if humans aren't working, how are you getting paid?
Yeah, and that's kind of what we have to do, is make these jobs for people.
Right.
Make people jobs. Mm-hmm. And it's basically people helping other people. Mm-hmm. For example, my thing is, and I have nothing against old people, but it does sound kind of mean, but basically, I work in an industry where vehicles are involved, right? And what I see is that, or what I hear basically and kind of see is that old people essentially get into crashes. Mm-hmm. And it's not because they're bad drivers. It may just be because, reaction time gets lowered as you get older and stuff like that. And then everything's so fast. When they were our age, speed limit was like 50 miles an hour going on the highway. Now we're pushing it to like 80. Mm-hmm. And so my idea is that we go ahead and we but offer old people this idea to opt out of a driver's license. Let's say you're on Social Security, you're 65 years old or whatever. You go ahead and you offer them, hey, we'll go ahead and take your driver's license away. You can't drive anymore. However, on the opposite end, we will give you a 5 to 10% rebate on everything you buy. And so long as you keep the receipts, you turn them in X amount of days or every month or whatever, we'll give you a rebate. So that way it's a little bit more easier to sustain yourself. And then the second thing would be we also give you access to go ahead and use this service, which is kind of like what they have here in Pueblo, which is Medicaid rides. Mm-hmm. And basically it's just other people driving you around. Mm-hmm. So it's other human beings driving you around. If you have an appointment, you can schedule in advance. If you need to go somewhere, you can go ahead and call up the service, and then there's someone that's going to be there for you. And it has to be a person because essentially with some of these older people, some of them do need some kind of assistance getting in or out of their house and moving stuff. So it has to be a person because it's a not as efficient situation because you do have to go ahead and judge by every situation.
Yeah, I see what you're saying in that, and moving forward, we have to look for different avenues that would allow us to have a purpose at a workplace. What are you doing? You can't just be kind of sitting around. You have to have some kind of purpose. And you look at all the jobs that are going away, and you look at what you're talking about, retail stores, where you're having tons of retail stores that are being shut down, and everything is moving to online stuff. Anything that's doing good, like Walmart, Target, stuff like that, they're pushing a lot of online sales. And this is moving us towards this full automation, where right now you go and you put your order in online, then you go and you pick it up. Soon that'll all be for delivery, and it'll be delivery by automation.
Essentially, if you want to talk about Walmart in specific, they are trying to make themselves a distribution center, without closing the front doors, which is, it could be costly. I'm not sure, but have you ever gone to a Walmart?
Well, they're trying to set new models. Yeah. They're trying to design these new models that would allow them to keep their doors open without necessarily having to shut down right now.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that happens, what happens in the future, you can't really say, but that's the thing, is that they're working through it right now, and automation is just. It's being implemented. It's being implemented in all facets. I mean, like I'm talking about from the retail stores to delivery to fast food, banking. There's so many facets of where automation is taking over right now, and that's kind of what. We need to look at in terms of how soon is this stuff going to come.
Yeah. I guess we should give a little bit of an example of each one, because we say this and people are like, what are you even talking about?
Where is this happening? So, for instance, retail stores, they're shutting down.
Look at Sears, Kmart, for catalog stores.
For girls that, do a lot of the shopping in these retail stores, they know that all of these retail stores that they used to frequent shutting down, and they're shutting down by, you find out, and by Monday and by Wednesday they're shutting doors. It's happening so fast. They're filing for bankruptcy. They just can't sustain in this economy of online sales and automation. Then you have fast food, What are some examples?
Fast food is going to be like Grubhub and stuff like that.
Right,
McDonald's with the kiosks,
yeah,
little kiosks that you order from.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of delivery. When you go into these places, you deal with a kiosk instead of having to deal with a cashier. So they're replacing those kind of jobs. Let's take one further. You remember a company we had seen from California? I think they were a California-based company.
I think I got it on my phone. They're from San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. And they were automating the food process of like how to make a burger, I think, right?
Yeah.
And they had a little automated machine that was able to prepare your burger for you. And so that's another step into where automation would be going into replacing more and more parts of the industry.
I'm reading the article right now, and it doesn't say the name in the first kind of couple paragraphs, but basically it's robots making a $6 burger in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially you don't need a person for anything other than just to fill the robot back up with buns, lettuce, tomato. I think they were
getting people to like take the order or something like that at that place, at that establishment. I think they were getting somebody to like take your order and like maybe just serve it to you or something. But
they put it in, and then the robot goes ahead and gets you your tray, and the tray goes down the assembly line, and then you just pick it up.
Yeah, they had their model of how to do things. McDonald's has a different model of where they're implementing their technology, but when they merge, we're talking about a whole
new company,
a whole restaurant that could be, have full automation integrated into what they do.
And then with that other company that you're saying that it's going to have robotic drivers, I mean, essentially, it's just the food industry is all going to be taking over.
Well, those were this other company that I saw about robotics that were doing deliveries. They were just like little bot machines. They weren't like full vehicles. They were just like little. Like these little machines for now. And I mean,
look at autonomous vehicles.
They were, before we get to that real quick, those little robots that are delivering food right now, they are doing very well on university campuses. Mm-hmm. That's where they're doing very well, where you can stay in a nice little area or whatever.
You have a map of it.
Exactly. And again, they're just working through how to become more efficient. But then you lead up to
Or should we say something about the banking industry?
You want to say, let's talk about the banking real quick, because, again, people don't see that.
For example, the ATM redefined the bank teller's job. You don't no longer need to go inside the facility. You can go on the outside, get your money. Well, Apple, and again, going back to Apple, Apple released a thing to where it's called Apple Cash, and basically they give you a digital debit card, which you can go ahead and extract funds, put it on this card, and if someone sends you funds, you get it on this card, and then you can take those funds and send it back to your bank account.
Right.
So essentially they're eliminating cash, or trying to eliminate cash.
And even, you can even talk about just the banking apps, the banking apps that each bank has, and how much functionality you have. When you deposit a check, you don't necessarily have to go to the.
No, you just take pictures of it.
To the teller, you just take a picture of it, and the funds are automatically there. So there's so many transactions that are happening nowadays that are digital, and so you could very easily see how banks are phasing out. For example, I asked you because you bank with a bank who's not a local bank here.
No, the closest branch is an hour away.
They're a national bank, and their closest branch about an hour away from here. And I'm like, how do you bank with them? Like, how do you not ever need to use
how do you
an in-branch service or something like that?
I just don't, because essentially here's how you do it. Let's say you. And again, I don't believe in paper or plastic, so money is like, why are we still using coins and dollars? It doesn't make any sense when everything's digital.
Yeah.
But, if I ever do need cash for whatever odd reason I would need cash for, I would just go to the local grocery store and then be like, can I get $20 cash back or whatever? That's my cash. Like,
but I guess you could even, what you were talking about right now, if you were to have this Apple Card...
Yeah,
you could transfer some of that money.
So if you
there
needed money, I could go ahead and transfer you money, or if I gave you those $60, you transferred me $60 to my Apple Card.
Yeah.
And then for my Apple Card, I will go ahead and send to my bank.
So there's some workarounds that you can get through right now.
Yeah.
So it's not very, very necessary to have in-branch services and stuff like that.
It's ridiculous. Like,
wow. Yeah.
I think Discover Base, what's the word I'm looking for? Discover bases their branches on the fact that they're all digital. They don't have a physical location. They have ATMs and they have partnerships with other banks to go ahead and get no fees.
Right.
But they don't necessarily have a physical institution.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that is some crazy stuff of how these brick and mortar sites are just not a thing anymore. So that's how banking is getting phased out. I guess, and then we get into automobiles.
Yeah.
Automobiles and automation. What is it with automobiles?
So Tesla's pretty much, I guess we can call Tesla the world standard because the world we live in is
For
America. Now. Yeah. I mean, China has electric vehicles too, and they've had them, but we don't hear nothing about them.
Yeah, Tesla's the leading.
Yeah, the leading in electric vehicles.
Right.
Ford, GM, they've tried. Right. They're not there yet. But basically, and I was telling my grandma these vehicles are pretty much driving themselves, and she's like, "Well, how come we don't see them, this and that, and everywhere?" It's just because they're really in the major cities.
Right. It's what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. It's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I tell her,
that, not everybody has them yet, but as we approach this fourth generation, everybody will have these.
Yeah, like I was even
the fourth revolution, I'm sorry.
Yeah, like I was looking at it, a base Model 3, I think is only like $26,000.
Yeah.
That's as much as
for a Tesla?
Yeah, for a Tesla.
I think they're a little bit higher than that.
If you get with all the luxuries, that's what I'm saying. The base, bare minimum, not performance or anything, it's going to be about $26,000. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, that's as much as a regular like Honda or something like that. Yeah. And normally when you go with Honda, you're not looking for power. You're looking for reliability and fuel efficiency. So it's like, wow, this Tesla is pretty much on par with the Honda.
Yeah.
And so my thing is that these vehicles are essentially driving themselves. And my grandma's like, well, you don't see that. I'm like, Grandma, I see it all the time. We have a stretch of highway. There's a bunch of Teslas that go through. Mm-hmm. They're on their way to Denver, leaving here and going somewhere else. And they're around. And she's like, well, they're not going to be able to drive through traffic. And I'm like, Grandma, Elon just had a conference not too long ago saying that they're going to release an update to where the vehicle can go ahead and take pretty much take a turn, essentially. Uh-huh. Like they can pass someone up and then go ahead.
Their AI is improving so that they can make more logistic maneuvering.
Yeah, and they can be more efficient on and off the on-ramp and everything in between for the most part and park themselves. And she's like,
they can do lane switching.
Yes, that's what it is, lane switching.
Like parking and stuff
like that. Yeah, and she's like, what? And she's like, how does it do that? And then we got into the fact that these electric vehicles are so advanced. They have thousands of sensors. I think the average gasoline vehicle has 36,000 moving parts or something like that, or 36,000 parts on it. Mm-hmm. These electric vehicles have way more because they have way more sensors. They have way more computing power. Mm-hmm. And they're able to go ahead and tell or measure the traction of the wheels 1,000 times a second or something like that, or 1,000 times a minute, and be able to adjust the wheels as needed, so that way you don't skid, and they're super safe and reliable.
Right. Yeah, and so we're talking about efficiency.
Yeah, and it's just taking people out of the equation,
making a lot of these decisions. Yeah, instead of having a person have to have human reaction, you have computing that's making all these, second by second decisions.
Yeah. I would say millisecond. They're making these millisecond decisions.
I don't know how fast it would be, computing this, but they're happening. They're instant, I guess, instant decisions. And, they ultimately have the sensors, of course, to be automated, but some of the other cars that aren't even electric yet. They also have like these other sensors for
they're kind of the same thing.
Or like braking sensors.
Yeah, and they're kind of the same
stuff
thing.
like that. Like to again, like like that's where we kind of had done some of this stuff. Where we went from like having a seatbelt to having a airbag to having.
But those took years to implement.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like the seatbelt took a long time to get put in place, and I don't know when that happened.
I think it started in the 50s, and then it didn't really get implemented into the late 60s, early 70s. Yeah, I know for sure in 72 because my Cadillac has it.
Yeah.
And it's standard.
Right. So around the 70s, and then maybe around the 90s is when airbags came in, and then maybe about another 20 years, something like that, you started seeing where you have these sensors that were like for braking and stuff.
That's called the ABS, yeah.
Well, not necessarily the ABS, but these other ones that will brake for you to alert that like there's a car in front of you or something like that.
Well, that's part of the ABS sensor. Basically, the ABS sensor goes ahead and it's called the anti-lock braking system.
Right.
And basically, what it does is that it pulsates the brake pads against the rotor.
You don't start skidding.
1,000 times a second or something like that, or 1,000 times a minute. So that way you don't skid, fishtail. And when you go ahead and hit the brakes real hard, that your brake pads are not constantly on the rotor and they heat up and lock up.
Right.
And then the idea of the car stopping for you is the ABS interacting with another sensor, one that can actually detect how far away you're from something, and then start implementing that right away.
Right.
And so it's just a combination of adding more sensors, making this thing more smarter, and then going ahead and implementing autonomous driving.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is that the lead up, is like it's almost seen as minimal. Like you see a seatbelt, it's like what the hell is a seatbelt? And then you see an airbag. It's like, oh wow, it's an airbag. It's like it may save you, it may not. and then you get to these sensors where it's like now you're trying to get to almost 100% safety. Where you would have no fatalities, and that's where automation is heading. Where we want this 100% efficiency, where we can just get as efficient as possible and just have consistency. It just happens every time.
Yeah.
Every time. How many times do you get upset when you go to a fast food restaurant and you order and they mess up your order?
Every time here. Every time here.
And with automation, if you do, if you put your information in right, then the output should be right every time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
that's what I've been doing with the apps, the restaurant apps.
Right, and that's why we don't want we don't really care to have a human really working in that position anymore.
Because people mess up everything.
Willing to go ahead and integrate this automation so that we feel we would have a better life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, man. But yeah, this automation stuff is definitely around the corner.
Yeah. So just to recap, the first to the second industrial revolution was about 100 years, roughly. The second to the third was roughly about 50, 60, something like that. And then what we're assuming is going to be the third to the fourth is going to be even less. So, yeah, I mean, we're pretty much right there, and that's what everyone's talking about is regulation for these big tech companies, AI and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, just something to think about.
For people who may be thinking that this automation is, 100 years before hitting, what would be your best guess?
What year are we in? 2019?
Yeah, we're in 2019 right now. What would you say that we start seeing a lot of this stuff being? Because it's hard to say. Like, what are we speculating? At what point? Because there's already a lot of this being integrated.
Things continue the way they are right now.
Right. But what point are we trying to define here? Like the point where automation is just way, like, at what percentage in everybody's household?
Okay. So
or at what percentage of everybody's
I say
life?
We're going to hit the fourth industrial revolution here in 10 to 15 years, and it's not going to be super popular until another 2025.
Yeah. So,
not 2025 a year, but 20 to 25 years.
Yeah.
So 2042, 2045 is when automation is going to be pretty much in everyone's household. Everyone's going to pretty much know it, and it's just going to be apparent. And then 20 years from now, you're going to look back and be like,
there's going to be something.
Vic called it. Vic and Joel called it.
Yeah. So that's 20 years forward. And then if you had to speculate 20 years from there, which would be like 2060, what
would you be heading into the fifth?
And what do you think that fifth?
The fifth one is just going to be, again, full integration.
So we go from automation to integration.
Yes, because essentially...
once you can get everything... because, yeah, I guess we do have automation, like, for instance, just being able to talk to Siri in a HomePod. Mm-hmm. You know, you already have it implemented. Yeah. Just being able to set the temperature setting on a Nest thermostat or a smartphone-enabled thermostat.
And then the fourth, everyone's going to have those capabilities.
Right. It'll be a lot more common.
The thing is just going to be doing it automatically.
And then the fifth would be where it's just controlling, where you don't even have to go in and manually
everyone would have that,
Yeah, it would just be more like... it just starts happening.
Yeah, and then I don't know what they would be doing in the fifth. It would just be trying to get full integration.
Yeah. I don't want to get all the way into that, but that's what we were talking about. Where your grandma was like, "Man, where are y'all going with that conversation? Y'all are 5,000 years ahead."
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, maybe it's like 15, 20," and I'm like, "Yeah, Grandma, it's gonna happen. Like, I'm gonna see it in my lifetime."
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's a trip to think how close we are to this, you know, and it may seem like, you know, they're just talking, it's just BS. Look at this, man. Go to your local McDonald's, go to your local Walmart, see how many people you find working there versus how many used to be there 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
See how much stuff is automated in your household. How often do you use a banking app?
Yeah, it's not that hard to look around your life and start seeing how much of this stuff is implemented in your life.
Do you have a HomePod? Do you use Siri or Alexa?
Bluetooth speakers.
Yeah.
Do you use any kind of Bluetooth speakers? Do you
streaming services? Anything like that?
Yeah. Do you use any kind of streaming services? Do you are you on any kind of social platform?
Do you have a tablet?
Yeah. Do you have devices? There's a lot of stuff we're trying to kind of get you to open your eyes on, and how this is already integrated into so many parts of your life.
The thing is, people need to, or someone needs to find out how to create jobs that help people. My thing is, going back to, we need to make jobs where people can take care of people. For example, taking away old people's licenses, giving them driving, like giving them drivers.
You're with it. You're like, I'm with it. It's gonna work.
Yeah. The other thing would be.
I get what you're saying, but yeah, definitely people have to go ahead and
having community gardens. That'd be another thing.
Yeah. Well, you have to go ahead and start, looking in a little bit more and saying, what is it that I can do as a human that is beneficial to
my species,
to humankind, and a robot can't do. And so those are some hard looks into what do we have, what kind of work we have for us up ahead, because it's real hard. I see what you're saying with that example, and it's a good example, but that's not going to replace, industries of jobs that are being
it's not out. But it will help. I mean,
and that's what I'm saying. We have to expand into what else, what other kind of stuff. And it's a big discussion, and to like brainstorm and think about all this kind of stuff.
Here's another one.
Oh, you already got them right now?
I got a couple of them. They're not. Some of them are good. Some of them are not so good. Here's another one that people would like. Make weed legal in every state. Have someone who in every community who's a grower, so that one person grows weed for the community. They can go ahead and use it to heal their ailments, and they can go ahead and sell it off or whatever, so that way they can make a little bit of revenue for the community.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, that's a bigger picture of how you take a new industry and you start to interject it into making people see, like, hey, either even if you're not with it, your job's being taken over. So you might want to change your mind of how you see things, and see this as not so bad, and excuse me, and to use this as a new industry.
Essentially, you would find ways to take money from big companies, put it into these smaller communities, and help bring up these smaller communities. It's just all about keeping the dollar in your community.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
Right.
And then just going from there. So instead of going buying pills and giving to pharmaceutical companies who don't care about you, invest in your local weed grower.
Yeah.
And they can go ahead and make these topicals and stuff like that. And we talk about that in the podcast Living in an MJ State. And
there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I don't want to dive too deep into how much of a benefit the weed industry could be. But yeah, that is one great example of how you could take a new industry that could become extremely beneficial, and how it could create a lot of work for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's I guess pretty much wraps it up of where we had been for 100+ years, where we're heading, and how accelerated, how close it is, and how accelerated of a rate that we're heading towards this automation. This is I guess we can't even take credit necessarily for saying this fourth industrial revolution. This is a little bit of talk that we're hearing from presidential candidate Andrew Yang. He's spreading this message of what he is seeing happening from a lot of people in Silicon Valley who are putting a lot of money into automation, and what it's going to do to our economy, what it's going to do for workers. And so yeah, this is a deeper, you could say even a deeper look into where our nation is heading within even the next 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, we shall see.
Yep. Start thinking about what your next job would be.
Mm-hmm. Or come up with a new job, or become a local weed grower.
Yeah, you got to think about something, because automation is definitely
it's around the corner.
Yeah, it's around the corner. It's here, and it's just going to be coming at us. So
I think that wraps it up for this episode.
Yep. Alrighty, guys. Until next time.
See ya.